Hi, I'm Josh Goding, here with my friend Tyler Smith to continue our series of programs in which we talk about science fiction. And today we're going to be talking about television science fiction, two great classic series, US 50s and 60s, The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. Both of those had some similarities superficially, both, as I said, TV programs about science fiction.
Yeah, in some ways they were very similar and very different, you know.
And the Twilight Zone was a little bit earlier on. It had a run, and then it had at least one reboot. It had a couple seasons in the 50s, right up until about 1963. Yeah. And then there was a reboot in the 80s, and it also had a movie. Yeah. And I think there might have been a 90s reboot too. Of course, we're not going to get into those later iterations. But similarly, The Outer Limits also had a run like right on the coattails of the Twilight Zone. I think it started in '63 or so.
Yeah, it was kind of a rip-off almost of Twilight Zone or offshoot or whatever you want to call it. But for something that was, some people call a rip-off, it was actually a pretty good show overall.
Yeah, and some of the critics said that, you know, it was suffered comparisons to the Twilight Zone, so they said it wasn't as good, and wasn't The Outer Limits a one-hour show possibly as compared to
it started out as a one-hour show, and it was always a one-hour show. Twilight Zone started out as a half-hour show, and when it became popular, it went to 1 hour.
That's what I was thinking. They got the one-hour format maybe for the second
season. The Outer
season.
Limits was only on for a season and a half actually, but in that season and a half, it made TV history. You know, it made some of the best science fiction TV episodes of all time. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this show is because some of the best science fiction episodes ever made was actually made on TV. You know, and I think you would agree with that. You know, like Fun and Games, Terror at 20,000 Feet.
And meanwhile, maybe some of what was going on in the cinemas was not as interesting or a lot more derivative.
No. What I'm saying is what was going on in the cinema. Also in the 50s, a lot of that was really quite good and interesting. But I'm saying, you know, we shouldn't overlook the accomplishments of television. That's all I'm saying in there.
That's a very good point. Yeah. And whether the format was a half hour or hour, both of the programs had their roots in the same sort of cultural angst of the 50s and 60s. Yeah. You had a lot of themes going in there. What was some of the stuff that the writers of that time were thinking about dealing with? I mean,
you have to understand something. Rod Serling, he wanted to do controversial stories. Rod Serling, he was basically a good writer who was trying to be a great writer. And he was very ambitious in his writing, even though his skill as a writer didn't quite rise to the level of his ambition. But the fact that he was trying to do great works, you know, pushed him to a higher level than what most writers were even attempting at that time, TV or cinema. Yeah, he wanted to do controversial issues, and he understood that stories, to have any real weight to them, they have to be morality tales. They have to have something important to say. And the thing was, in his day, it was easier to fire a troublesome writer than to find a new sponsor. And that was the problem Serling had often. He kept getting the boot in television because the material he was doing was too controversial, and that's why he came up with the Twilight Zone.
Was he
because he could do these stories in a sci-fi backdrop, tell the stories he wanted to tell, and then he could get past the censors that way, and people who are watching it opens up their minds as well, because now they're not attached to their own personal biases. You see what I'm saying? They can see this in a fresh light, and they're like, wait a minute, what they're doing is really wrong there, and this is something a lot of people weren't saying at the time, like about McCarthyism. Mm-hmm. He made a lot of statements about McCarthyism and the warnings of fascism and extremism.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because even in an episode like The Eye of the Beholder, where this woman has plastic surgery done to make her look normal, and then you realize she's gorgeous looking, but everyone else looks like a pig. And now she's a misfit and an outcast. But in the backdrop of that, they had a Joe McCarthy type of character on the television, saying one people, one nation, basically a fearmonger and a hate monger who's using people's fears to grab more power for himself. And there was a warning there. And that's one of the things that really upsets me about what's going on now. There's more to criticize now than there was even back in the 50s.
I see.
We don't seem to see...
And entertainment
right? Yeah. We don't seem to see
Entertainment
writers
is the lowest common denominator instead.
We don't see most writers rising to the occasion and actually having something to say.
That's a good point. So both Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits are able to use that great function of sci-fi, which is social critique from a sort of a safer virtual environment where, if this is set in outer space or the future, that it's not necessary, it's safe to criticize the government that you're in or the society that you're living in.
Yeah, absolutely, and they use that well. But the thing was The Outer Limits, I wanted to say this, the Twilight Zone was Rod Serling's attempt to get past the censors to tell the controversial stories he wanted to do.
He wasn't the only.
Science fiction.
Was he the only writer, director, or he was sort of in charge?
He was the creator of the show. He had creative control of that show. He was the writer, director, producer, all of it, and the narrator. Right. He did it all.
And he maybe had handpicked a small army of writers to pen the episodes.
That shared similar views that he had and a similar agenda. But the thing was. The Outer Limits was really true 50s science fiction. And by that, I mean it was bug-eyed monsters on the attack week after week. This is what was going on in the 50s. You see what I'm saying? For science fiction, it was much more sensationalistic. It was much more, darker. It was much more fear-motivated stories. You see what I'm saying? Whereas the Twilight Zone had kind of a more lighthearted feel to it. The Outer Limits was just dark, creepy.
I've read.
They had no sense of humor in the Outer Limits, none.
So we're talking, just to bring it back in, we're talking about Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits and some of the differences between those shows, and also about writers, and the difference between the writing in that era and now, perhaps. But
I want to say one other thing about the difference between Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits. The quality of the shows in the Outer Limits, on average, was much lower than the episodes in the Twilight Zone. But having said that...
The budgets or the...
No, I'm talking about the writing.
The overall...
The writing, directing.
Okay.
But having said that, the Outer Limits still produced some of the very best science fiction episodes ever produced, period. But it's like... And that's one of the things I wanted to hit on, was the fact that I think the anthology format for television is such a great format. Let me explain why. When you have a show like The Brady Bunch, you see what I'm saying? You have to have everything returned to exactly where it was last week.
Yeah.
Everything, nothing really dramatically can change from episode to episode.
Yes.
So you have to play it much safer. With an anthology story, you're making little movies every week. And in doing that, you don't have to go back to home plate every week. You can tell whatever story you want. You start at whatever point you want and go to whatever point you want. It gives you much more creative freedom.
That's a great distinction.
And not only that, the other thing I loved about these shows was they made a lot of them, one after another. And because of that, they constantly had to be pushing back the envelope. They had to be taking risks. They had to be trying different things, because after a while you start running out of ideas. So you try this, you try that, you try something else.
Let's talk about
you hit home runs. And
right.
Shall we talk about some of the home runs?
Yes, but before we do get into individual episodes, can you touch on TV as the insatiable, hungry monster that has to be
fed every week,
and also art through adversity, the limited budgets of these programs, and maybe the limitations and advantages of black and white versus color?
Well, one of the things I want to say, let's start first with black and white versus color. This kind of gave the shows kind of a film noir feeling. You see what I'm saying? And when you shoot something in black and white, the lack of color actually brings the performances out of the characters more strongly. See what I'm saying? Because color distracts and takes away from the performance. When you're shooting in black and white, that's really much more in your face. The performance of the actors. And the thing is yes, and one of the things about art through adversity, black and white, it really does have. These were dark stories, so it kind of had a film noir feel to it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? It was dark stories with like dark lighting, and the people in Twilight Zone and Outer Limits took very close care for the look and the feel of these shows. These weren't accidents, that these shows were so, visually stunning. There was a lot of thought and care that went into the look and the feel of these. And
you could also use the darkness cleverly to sort of mask things and make them more effective that maybe you just didn't quite have the ability to portray in a bright light.
Yeah, you had to use your imagination more. And also because they had limited budgets and limited special effects abilities, they really had to get creative in telling these stories. And because of that, they couldn't rely on the special effects to tell the story. They had to actually focus on the story itself and the character development. And let me give you an example of that in an Outer Limits episode. Martin Sheen was in this episode. It's about the Korean War. And these guys go off to fight the enemy, these aliens. And what happens is you see them get together to go off and fight them. And the next scene, we see them captured by the aliens. So we don't see the space battle. We don't see all that other stuff that would be sensationalistic, but doesn't really move the story along. You see what I mean? So because of that, we were actually making better episodes.
You go right to the plot point, which is their capture.
You go right to the meat of the story. Boom.
And we're left to dialogue and basically just the
character development.
Character development and acting is what's going to be required
carry the scene
to bring us into this world.
And tone and feel. Yeah. If you look at it's and I don't see the care and the craft, not just in the writing but also in the filming. To make something look visually this stunning. The people who did these programs, they loved what they were doing. They were passionate about it. And you get swept up in this passion as you're watching it, even if you don't realize that, intellectually, emotionally, you're watching it like, hey, wow, this is pretty good.
But in today's sci-fi, and especially when you go to the movies, sci-fi and fantasy, it's dumbed down, and also it's as if they think they can digitally add the heart later, or they're going to digitally add the acting later,
Well, basically what I see going on, James Gray was talking about this, he's a movie director. He said what he sees going on in films now is narrative laziness, because screenwriting is a craft. And he said Americans, he basically said Americans no longer know how to write good screenplays. He said, and part of the problem is a lot of your best writers are dead. Ray Bradbury, dead. Frank Herbert, dead. I mean, these guys were giants, in the field of science fiction. And I mean, they came up with great works in their day, but they're gone now. And you got writers like Joe Esterhaus, who's still alive, but he's not writing anything anymore. You see the problem?
Yeah.
A lot of your best writers, they're either dead or they're getting up there in years. And we've created a society that's become so materialistic, that's become so narcissistic, that's become so shallow, because corporate America, who's controls the media and controls the programming, they decided we want to make Americans out there really good consumers. And like the ancient Greeks said, be careful what you wish for, you might actually get it. A society that's become very shallow, adolescent, narcissistic, and you have writers that are coming out of that society who literally have nothing to say. They're not interested in being artists, they're interested in being stars. So they become panderers. They start doing stuff that they think the audience is going to want to see, rather than doing it the other way. This is what I'm passionate about. I'm going to write it, and I don't care. I don't give a darn. I don't give a hoot if no one else wants it. I'm so passionate about it. I'm going to write this for free on spec. I see interview after interview of writers in the business, and they say, "Oh, I never write on spec," because you have nothing to say. Of course, you don't write on spec.
I'm only interested in that deal.
Yeah, but it's but I mean, it's a problem of society as a whole. It's not just a problem of the industry.
Well, let's come full circle to writing and today's writers. In a bit, but let's talk about what has worked, what has succeeded overwhelmingly, and you've marked a certain episode of The Outer Limits as
we both loved.
We both loved, and your all-time favorite, perhaps even.
Well, that was my all-time favorite. I think it's the best TV science fiction episode ever made, hands down, bar none. You know,
The Outer Limits, Fun and Games.
Yeah, that's Fun and Games, Outer Limits episode. Nick Adams starred in it, and if you don't know who Nick Adams is, he played one of the gang members in Rebel Without a Cause. So that was the other thing he's famous for. He was one of the, when the leader of the gang dies, he takes over. He was like the second in command.
Now, in Fun and Games, Nick Adams plays Mike Benson, I believe. Who is
he plays a boxer.
Washed-up boxer.
Well, he's not so much washed up, but as a boxer who's lost his nerve, actually. Mm-hmm. He's not washed up at this point. He just doesn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
He's not past his prime. But basically, he's lost his nerve, and he's a damaged person. He's never known anything but being dumped on and screwed over by society and the system. And now, the plot, if you want to get the plot line.
Sure.
The basic plot line is that he's this boxer, he's lost his nerve, and him and this other woman, they get picked by these space aliens to fight primitive aliens from another planet to the death in the arena as a reality TV show. And you can understand something, this is 1950s. We didn't have reality TV shows until the 1970s. Talk about prophetic. Talk about way ahead of the curve.
This is basically the Hunger Games plot.
Yeah, way before there was a Hunger Games. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, so he is given the choice to fight in the arena. And he asks him, well, if I don't fight in the arena, what happens? Planet Earth will be blown. They tell him planet Earth will be blown up in 5 years.
But you get 5 years to live a normal life, and then we'll destroy the Earth.
Destroy the Earth. And he says, 5 years is enough for me. Send me back. I'd rather live 5 years than die in the arena tomorrow.
Right. That was kind of critical in the first act, where he says,
"Well, that's what's so great.
There's nothing worth saving really back there for me."
Yeah, and that's what's so daring about this episode. That's why it's such genius, because instead of having a dashing hero who just wants to solve all the problems of the universe and the world, yet save the human race, you have an anti-hero. You have a guy who's very flawed. And, he's given a choice to save the human race, and he's like, what has the human race ever done for me? That's basically what he says. He's like, I've never, he's never known anything but being screwed over his entire life. So it's like, he doesn't care if the human race gets wiped out.
And then his counterpoint is basically a divorcee named Laura, I think.
Yeah.
And the two of them, so they do take the option to go back at first. They kind of go back.
Well, it was his choice.
Yes.
She didn't want to. She wanted to go in the arena, but she didn't want to do any of the fighting. She wanted him to do all the fighting.
Right.
Because he's a boxer and he's a guy. You see what I'm saying? So she's actually put in a position where she has to fight herself. And that was very daring, because she doesn't want to fight. She wants him to fight for her.
Right.
And she'll just cheer him on.
And so this alien race, the Andarians, I believe, with that sort of classic mask from
face.
From the Outer Limits that everyone probably recognized. They're sort of compared to the Romans returning from the spoils of war and setting up the Colosseum for their own entertainment, that sort of thing.
To pacify the masses, to control them,
And so they set up, as you say, this arena conflict, and what is the final resolution of the plot?
Basically, the two of them have to fight the aliens. One of them dies early on, killed by his own teammate because he wants to have more food to wait him out. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Diabolical.
Killed its own mate or something.
His own mate, yeah. Mm-hmm. As I'm watching this, I'm like, this is vicious. This is, you watch this and you realize how calculating the creatures they're fighting are.
So they have this sort of a bridge type device, or there's a bridge type structure that they have to cross, this molten magma or whatever.
Well, it's basically a hot water thing. Mm-hmm. There's hot water there, and not magma, but hot water, and
you'll burn up if you fall into it, basically.
You'll get cooked a little bit, But what happens is he's on the bridge. The other alien, the primitive, comes to attack him, and she has to throw the boomerang to save her guy and to kill the enemy. And she didn't want to do any of the killing. She wanted him to do all of it. So that was really interesting in of itself, where she had to rise to the occasion. And she didn't really she wanted him to do all the fighting. And that was, it's interesting because in a story like this, usually you have one character that has a major transformation. In this, you actually have two characters who have a major transformation in it. That's almost unheard of in movies or television. And it's done very well. It's seamless, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But I want to get into my favorite scene in this.
Okay.
And that's with Nick Adams, where he's a boxer, and he talks about cheerleaders and how much he hates cheerleaders.
Saying that Laura is one of the cheerleaders of the world.
Yeah, she's one of the cheerleaders. And he says, you get out there and you cheer us on to get our heads kicked in, And he says, and the reason you cheer us on is because you don't want to get out. You don't have the guts to get in the ring and take the punches and the kicks and the blows yourself. Mm-hmm. And he says, I hate cheerleaders. And that's why, because you convince guys like us to just keep on taking a beating for no good reason. This is very good writing. These are very complex, damaged people. And I mean, this is the exact opposite of Flash Gordon. This isn't melodrama, this is great drama. And if you haven't seen Fun and Games, what can I say? It's your loss. I think Fun and Games should be taught with the Odyssey of the Iliad. I mean, it's very good. I don't know what higher praise I could give.
What sorts of, there's some of the more obvious themes that are coming through in that episode, but what sorts of, hidden messages do you think there might be? Or not hidden, but what is sci-fi trying to teach us?
Well, they're trying to teach us, they're basically saying the human race, is a mess. That's the bottom line. And the reason, there's several reasons why we're a mess. But the thing is people, who are at the bottom of society, they get dumped on. And, some of them, because of that, they basically become angry, bitter, cynical, and callous. And it basically shows what a horrible society we live in. And this is something Rod Serling never dared to do. The Twilight Zone. That's why I listed better than anything they did in the Twilight Zone.
I had also read that the Outer Limits episodes maybe fall more to the realm of pure science fiction, whereas the Twilight Zone...
Well, they're true 50s science fiction.
I see. They're about science, or plots that come out of science and technology and things like space travel.
Yeah, so Twilight Zone was social commentary in a science fiction veil, whereas Outer Limits deal more with the issues of science, and they also basically followed the tradition of 50s science fiction. And should we talk about that, what was going on in the 50s
yes.
for a bit? Okay, basically what you had going on in the 50s was World War II had just ended. But there was always that fear of invasion or being attacked. So you had movies like The Thing come out as a result of that.
Post-war tensions were turning into Cold War fears.
Yeah, exactly. But also you had the A-bomb and the fear of that and radiation. So you had movies like Godzilla and the Beginning of the End come out as an offshoot of that, fear of technology. And then
fear of communism, fascism.
Communism and fascism and extremism, and that's where McCarthyism was actually the inspiration for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I thought was ironic, because at the end, this wasn't in the original script, but at the ending, the film, the studio execs thought was confusing. So they have them call the FBI, to solve this problem. Well, that was the ultimate ironic touch, because this was about the FBI. This is who they were condemning, and the studio executives who were watching this were so dumb that they didn't get it. That was.
I see. I have to think
so
about that.
When you watch that episode, know that this was the ultimate ironic touch. This is like, or the Statue of Liberty at the end of the Planet of the Apes. It's this very ironic, dramatic touch. It's like.
Is this the one with Leonard Nimoy?
No, Leonard Nimoy wasn't in that one.
No, the Body Snatchers?
No, he wasn't in the original Invasion. He was
Sutherland?
in the remake of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about the 50s Invasion
I'm
of the Body
sorry.
Snatchers.
That's the one, for some reason,
That was
I
also
often think
very
of
good.
that one. Okay.
But you have to understand, the book 1984 had come out, so there was the fear of Big Brother. There was fear of living in this oppressive police state. And also, another subplot of the 50s, what was going on, scientists versus the military, in films like Godzilla. And they were fighting for the control of society. And if you watch a lot of those films, the scientist gives society good advice. And the people in power in the military ignore them and do what they want anyway, to disastrous results.
Interesting.
And that's, but the other things...
So science is being held up as a paradigm morally as well as...
Well, basically what it's saying, that the scientists are the people we need to listen to, not the military men and the businessmen. They're the ones who really know what's going on. And but there was also a lost generation in movies like Rebel Without a Cause. World War II was over. We'd gone through the Depression. We've come out of it. We went through World War II. We came out of it. And now there was like a lost direction. There seemed to be...
Sort of the doldrums of consumerism and conformity, I think.
Yeah, but it was also that, we had a mission and now we don't. We're lost as people here.
Until maybe
not this, then what?
we decided to go to the moon, I suppose.
Well, yeah, but that was more of a diversion. That wasn't really a true mission. I mean, and the Cold War, it was, even that was a thing to maintain the status quo. It wasn't so much to defeat the communists, just try and contain them. So we really were lost as a people.
And it's out of that time that some of these just great classic sci-fi is coming.
Sci-fi episodes come out. But the thing is you had some very gifted writers, working on these, and also passionate people who really were trying to do great art, not for the money in it, but for the love of it, for the passion of it. And the thing is I just don't see that in science fiction writing today, or in science TV or movies. Now, there are some shows like Law and Order, where the writing on that is pretty consistently good.
I see.
But for most television, particularly science fiction television right now, it's gotten really bad. I stopped. I used to subscribe to Starlog magazine. I stopped after I watched the movie Blade Runner. And the reason I stopped was because I looked at what... After seeing Blade Runner, it's like, once you've been to Perry, how can you go back to the farm? Once I saw Blade Runner, and then I looked at what's going on in sci-fi television and sci-fi movies, I just said...
Well, you've already peaked? It doesn't get any better.
It's not just that we peaked, but it's that I saw what's up here, and then I see what's going on, it's down here, the rest of it. And the gap was so huge, my mind just, I was just, oh my God!
Sci-fi, it can be up here. It can be...
Yeah, it can be up here, but usually it's down there, But the thing is I saw just, it was like the new generation was coming up and they were just making crap.
I think about some of the sci-fi I try to watch on TV nowadays. I guess what most springs to mind is trying to watch Lost, 6 seasons of Lost, and then finding at the end that maybe the writers didn't have the end in mind definitely didn't have the end in mind when they started it. Just kind of being let down after, following this thing after so many years.
Well, part of the problem, like I said, the problem starts right at the conception of these stories. In order for stories to have any real weight, they have to be morality tales. They have to have something to say that we can learn from. And if they don't have that, then they're just melodramatic light fluff.
They haven't seemed to even be responding to the internet, so whatever the fans seem to think the show was about or seem to be indicating they would want, it would sort of shift to become
to me
that.
It's like Lost is right.
Yeah, exactly. You've lost it.
They lost it, yeah.
So I think that was a writer, one of the writers on that was Damon Lindelof, who also penned Prometheus, which I think had some serious flaws.
I think it's interesting because it's like, you can tell that they intended it as an Alien prequel. They weren't calling it that. But there were some really big clues. Some other space jockey scene at the end.
Committee had rolled in and said, no, we can't do the Alien prequel, so this is this other thing. Yeah.
I watched the movie. I was just stunned at how bad it was. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
can't
had
think about it.
not exactly.
The kindest thing I can say about Prometheus was some of the special effects in there were very good.
Sure.
And the actors did a very good job considering how thin the material was. You know, that really impressed me.
It certainly looks and feels like it's supposed to be a much more important movie, a better movie than it is, and it is.
Well, I can't even believe it got mediocre reviews. It was terrible.
Yeah.
I walked out of there going, oh, man. I'm just so disappointed. You know, it's like
a little tiny.
I liked what. Can I quote another film critic after they saw a movie about Che Guevara?
Oh, okay.
He said, "More like grave robbers than biographers."
Oh.
You know, I think that's true here, ever more so. These people are grave robbers. You know, they're robbing the hard work of great writers.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
They haven't earned this material.
Yeah, and they haven't earned the ideas of it. They don't understand it. And as a result, it's just a bad rehash of what's been done before.
Yeah.
And the movie really turned my stomach. The art direction in it, I thought, was nauseating. You know, the whole I mean, but we're not going to get on Prometheus. That's another show.
Prometheus? Okay, yeah. But just talking about writers, though, and so Lindelof, you know, despite totally ruining Prometheus with the writing and the people that don't act normal and plot holes the size of a battle cruiser, he's gone on to write.
Nitpick.
Well, he's written the new Star Trek, Into Darkness, along with Roberto Orci, who is writing Ender's Game, which I do hold out hope for. Hopefully it's going to be a good film.
Ender's Game, you know, as you know, is considered probably one of the top 10 science fiction novels of all time.
Orson Scott Card's.
Yeah, probably his best work, and so we'll hold out hope for that. You know, a lot of people condemn Dune, but it's like, I thought it was more of an interesting failure than really a disaster. You know, to me it was, you know, Prometheus was a movie I absolutely hated. You know, whereas Dune, I was kind of like, you know, it was half good at least. You know, it was half good.
Oh, David Lynch's Dune.
Bad. Yeah, well, I also like the TV version too, which I thought was also good, but it was underfunded.
That did have its high points.
Yeah, but the writing in it was solid at least, and the directing was. But you know,
it's interesting times too. You know, where the Star Wars movies are going to be rebooted by Disney, I guess, and they've got writers Lawrence Kasdan, Simon Kidney, and Michael Arndt, who wrote Little Miss Sunshine. Apparently, is going to write episode 7. So I wonder what we can see what these will be like. But Star Wars has already been so ruined beyond retribution that I don't really hold out much hope for the new trilogy or anything.
Yeah. I heard a rumor actually that they tried to hire Dan O'Bannon to write Return of the Jedi.
Writer of the Alien.
Yeah, and him and George Lucas weren't friends. I mean, they really had some nasty words with each other.
Is he writing Revenge of the Jedi for George?
Well, Return of the Jedi. And they couldn't come to terms, you know. And I think Dad said some nasty words when they approached him. That kind of ended that right there.
I see.
You know, he's like, what do you want? I heard he also told them, look, I write little dramas. You know, I don't write action films. You know, this is completely different from my style of writing.
But they did end up with Kasdan, I guess, who was one of the writers of the original episode 4, I think.
Kasdan was one of the writers of Return of the Jedi. You know, it really was a mess. And the thing was it was one of those things where it just really didn't come together for a wide variety of reasons.
Jedi?
Yeah, Jedi, yeah.
Yeah, we better not get started on Jedi.
Okay, yeah. Let's get back to this.
Should we jump back into the 50s and the 60s and talk about another classic sci-fi Twilight Zone episode, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet?
Yeah, that was, I think, Twilight Zone's best episode. I listened to the second best sci-fi episode of all time, actually.
So in this episode,
Shatner plays a man who had a nervous breakdown on an airplane earlier.
And he's just been released.
He was in an insane asylum.
It was asylum.
And he's just been released. And he had a panic attack on an airplane, thought someone was trying to damage the airplane. And what happens is there's a gremlin on the airplane that knows Shatner's story, and it's really messing with him. he keeps damaging the airplane, and it only lets him see it, you know? So every time he goes to warn people, as soon as someone else gets close to the window, it's gone.
So he can see this creature out on the wing that's
but
damaging
it'll disappear
the plane.
as soon as someone else looks at the window.
So we sort of have the boy who cried wolf.
Too many times, and now no one believes him, you know. And the thing was, Shatner was never better in, I think, anything he ever did than this episode. He really, you know, he gave a very good performance, and it really worked. It's interesting because John Lithgow, when he did the movie version,
That's right. This episode was remade as part of the
Twilight Zone
80s
movie. Yeah. The Twilight Zone movie. As I watched both performances, I was like, man, I think it's about a dead time. They were both.
Oh, I don't remember Lithgow. Okay.
Yeah, Lithgow, but I was like, oh my, you know, I appreciated Shatner's performance even more after seeing John Lithgow, a very strong actor, also nail it. I think it was a dead tie in terms of who was better. They were both great. They were both very good. But the thing is it deals with the idea of what is real. You know?
Okay.
And
Classic Twilight Zone
as
theme.
opposed to what people believe to be real.
A theme in classic, both Twilight Zone and sci-fi.
Sci-fi, exactly, and a common theme in that. And as I was watching the episode, I was wondering if the guy wasn't going nuts. You know, even though I'm seeing the gremlin there.
Yes.
I was wondering if I was seeing
We're
his
just
hallucination.
being brought on his madness.
Yeah. That's the way I was interpreting it as I was watching it. Or I was wondering if that was what was going on. But no, it was a real gremlin. It was really destroying the engine. We find that out at the end.
That's right. There's some objective evidence of the wing being damaged.
Yeah, well, the engine had been opened up mechanically. So clearly it was, you know. But one of the things I thought was really clever about it was when the captain of the ship, he's talking to Shatner, he's telling him about the gremlin. And the captain starts humoring him, and Shatner doesn't realize at first they're humoring him. And then when he does, he's furious.
Well, isn't there a connection to, like, gremlins actually being reported as, or maybe sort of an Air Force joke or something?
Yeah, there's an Air Force joke about gremlins, but yeah. But the thing is that was one of the times where everything came together just really well. The writing was very good, acting, editing, directing, boom. They nailed it. It was phenomenal.
And it's just as much perhaps about it's about the angst of modern society, fear of like flying, as the fear of technology.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Giving up our power.
The thing is I look at an episode like that Twilight Zone episode. What did they shoot that on? $50,000 or something like that? You know, what did they spend on Prometheus? Like 200 million?
I hear they're getting a sequel.
What?
I hear it's getting a sequel.
Oh yeah, 2 sequels.
Now this is trilogy material, right?
Yeah, I was like, oh man.
Wow.
Yeah, boy, you just can't keep a bad idea down in Hollywood.
They had that. I just got to rag on it one more time. So they had that threadbare idea of ancient astronauts, and the internet has just taken this way beyond anything that's in the movie or interesting about what the movie might have been about.
I read an interview with Dan O'Banion, and these creatures were traveling. It's a complete departure from his original story, because the space jockey was the actual pilot on the ship, and it had been fossilized millions of years ago. So these aliens were running around millions of years, like 60 million years ago.
Right.
Or 80 or 100 million years ago, when we weren't even humans yet. They weren't coming for us. We were too far down on the evolutionary food chain for them to even bother to think about.
Yeah.
You know, so that was a huge departure right there from the original story idea.
I see, with relativistic travel.
Yeah. These things had nothing to do with the human race. They're tying the human race in with these other travelers. It's a cheap trick, and it's not very good. You know?
I see.
One thing that was really interesting about Alien was the entire idea of Alien was that predators strengthen the herd. And that was the whole point of the movie Alien. And even though no one says this in the film, but you see how these people make mistakes. And natural selection takes them out very quickly. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, we're getting rid of the dumb gene. It's gone. She's the only one smart enough and strong enough to survive here. You see what I'm saying? You know, that was
Could
the
be,
point.
but there's some luck involved. I
Yeah,
think.
there was. Yeah, but that was the whole point. She was smart enough, strong enough, and lucky enough.
Yeah.
She had all the qualities to make it.
Right.
You know, and it's funny because James Cameron, in an interview right after he saw the first Alien film, you know, he said, "This is my favorite movie of all time, and it probably always will be." He's like, "I love this movie." He said, though, I was watching the film. We're in the middle of the movie. They're eating dinner before they're about to go into hypersleep, and he's starting to get really bored and pissed off at that point. And he said, "We're an hour into this film. Where's this movie going? You know, nothing really significant has happened."
I see.
And then he's like getting bored and even pissed off.
The
And
chest burster.
The chest burster scene comes. He said, "I went from boredom to sheer terror." He said, "I was screaming
Cameron?
Cameron said
I see.
this, yeah. He said, "I was screaming my head off at that scene." He said it was like Jaws.
And then he went on
He said
to,
you could see, he said he was sitting in the back of the theater. He said you could see all the popcorn fly up all at the same time, like in Jaws. He said the audience went from boredom to screaming their heads off in sheer terror, you know, and then dead silence, and then they started screaming again 10 seconds later. He said, but this time they were screaming with delight. They were like, "Wow!" He said,
right.
now they knew they were in for one hell of a ride.
Well, James Cameron went on to direct
Aliens,
but people will have to watch our show on Alien and Aliens to get more information about those programs.
Back to the 50s.
Yes. We'll take our time machine back to the 50s, and let's talk about a Twilight Zone episode where Agnes Moorehead is terrorized by mysterious invaders from another world.
Yeah, this is another example of art versus art through adversity, and it's interesting because as I was watching this episode, I saw it the way Rod Serling intended for me to see it. I was on the side of Agnes Moorehead. I was against the alien invaders, the astronauts.
Which are these tiny. We play with scale in this.
Well, they're about almost a tenth or a 20th of the size of her.
Mm-hmm. They almost look like little toys or something.
But the thing was because they didn't have CGI, you know, they had to do all these shots in camera with no real special effects equipment. But it worked because they alluded to things because they didn't have the budget to show them. And it's like what Spielberg said when he directed Jaws. He said, because I didn't have the time and the money to do it the way I intended to do it, made a much better movie if I had the technology and the special effects to do it the way I intended.
Very interesting.
You know, and it was the same way with the invaders, where they kept alluding to things the way they used the camera. They weren't showing a lot of things. They were just hinting at them, which sucked you in much more than if you.
And isn't this an episode that doesn't have any dialogue, at least for the first?
For most of.
99%
the only dialogue in it is Rod Serling at the beginning describing what's going on. And then at the very end...
You get the radio message.
You get the radio message, and I'm like, you know, when I hear the radio message is in English, and this woman I can tell by her performance that she can't understand what they're saying.
Yes.
I'm like thinking, is she from Russia or something like that? You know? And then I realized that the astronauts are us, the humans, and this is a giant. That was very clever. That was very Rod Serling.
So they flip-flopped.
Because you flip-flop your allegiances at the end. You're like, oh no, they wiped out our astronauts. And that was very clever. Serling did that in a lot of his episodes to try and get you to emphasize with the misfit and the outsider.
So you play with scale and point of view, and then you flip-flop at the end to
realize that it was us that were the invaders that time.
Create empathy, and then your emotions about the entire episode change in that last minute.
I mean, I was played emotionally exactly the way he intended.
Yeah.
And it worked, and I loved it.
Brilliant.
I loved it for it.
Architects of Fear, in which scientists create a trumped-up war.
The reason why this is such a good episode, basically the storyline Architects of Fear, they're worried America and Russia are going to blow each other up in a nuclear war. And they figure the way to stop us from blowing each other up is to create an outside fear to unite us together.
A common enemy.
A common enemy. And what they do is they have this guy transform himself physically into having a body that looks like an alien. You know? And they have the technology to do this. So what happens is in a rocket that's supposed to be putting up a satellite, he goes up in it. And then the satellite breaks off, and he has a little ship. And then they pick it up on radar coming down to land on Earth, as if to appear it's a scout ship from an alien race invading us. You know, the the forward guard, basically. And it has he has a ray gun. He starts zapping, what he sees as he's going along to make it look like they're hostile invaders. But in the end, what happens is the hoax gets exposed very early on. And the point of the episode is that the basis of peace isn't based on fear. It's based on building good relations with your neighbors. And that's what was so genius about it. And that's why it was so important. I mean, whether you liked the episode or not, you got to admit, it had something to say that was important.
In the end, I think it's the man's wife that they have some shared gesture that they both recognize.
He does, and she realizes that that's her husband. And the whole hoax gets exposed at that point. And, but the thing was one of the reasons I liked that episode was I was actually kind of on the side of these people who were thinking this might work. You see what I'm saying? And then at the end, when the narrator comes on, I'm like, yeah, he's right.
Shouldn't have been that way.
This is a pipe dream. This isn't the basis of peace. And that was a profound idea. It was a brilliant insight. And the episode was very well done. I mean, a lot of their episodes, like the Six Fingers and stuff like that, had real issues, that you could deal with as you're watching it. And the thing was my feeling on The Outer Limits was it's like about 1 out of 10 episodes of The Outer Limits was good. The rest of them were terrible. They were awful.
That's what I've heard about The Outer Limits.
Yeah, but when they were good, they were very good. Some of their episodes were very cutting edge.
What about The Four of Us Are Dying? Now, is that?
Yeah, that's Twilight Zone.
Okay.
And the thing that I thought was interesting about that is it's a story about a guy who's a shapeshifter. And by that I mean he can see a face of someone, even a picture. He can transform himself to look exactly like that person, and then sound like them too, but he doesn't have their memories. You see what I'm saying? So he keeps trying. So the guy's basically a scam artist. He's a con man, but he has this ability, and he's using it to try and get himself unfair advantages, undue enrichment, through this ability, through his ability to scam people. And it's interesting because in the end, he gets his up and comeuppance. And what happens is he keeps doing this, and he keeps wiggling his way out of situations, but he can only wiggle for so long. And he finally wiggles himself into a situation he can't get out of. That was what was really interesting about it. Because he keeps shape-shifting to try and get some advantage in one place or another, pretending to be someone he's not. And then he keeps getting found out, and he has to run away. But when he's running away, he's like, okay, I can just change to another face, change to another look, and then I'm gone. But he changes to the look of a boxer, and this was what's so clever about it. He changes to a look of a boxer, and he's walking away. This old man comes up to him and wants to talk to him. He says, Johnny, don't you remember me? He's like, no, I don't remember you at all. He's like, oh, come on, Johnny, you can't be joking. You have to remember me. He's like, what makes you say that? I'm your father, Johnny. He's like, I haven't seen you in 20 years. Where you been?
Right.
He's like, look, old man, I'm busy. Again. I gotta go. He's like, what? Yeah, you don't have time for your old father? The guy's so furious. He pulls out a gun and shoots him dead. I was like, oh my God. He finally got into a situation he couldn't wiggle out of.
That's right.
And that's what I thought was so clever about the episode. Kind of like Architects of Fear. You're trying to go the cheap way. You're trying to go the easy way. But it's the shortcut to disaster, Yeah,
there's always some little moral lesson, isn't there? Yeah. Or often there's something that we can, as the audience, glean from that. Yeah. So we've come away better.
Yeah, we grow as a person from it,
How does that differ from what we're seeing in today's entertainment, especially sci-fi?
It's interesting because the new Twilight Zone episode had some very good episodes in there.
I see the run from the 80s?
Yeah, the run from the 80s, but we're not going to get into that on this show.
Sure.
But the thing is what I see is rehashing what's been done.
I think some of their best ones are probably remakes from the original.
No. The new Twilight Zone episode didn't rehash any of the original episodes at all. They all were original stories.
I'm thinking of the movie, I guess.
The movie was mostly rehashes, not all of them. But the best episode was a rehash. You know, they redid what they did before in Terror 20,000 Feet. But the thing was what I see is basically narrative laziness, and what I see is them just recycling. You know, just lazily recycling what's been done before and changing it around a little bit, and not understanding what worked in the first place. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like that TV show Three's Company, where they had an episode where they were trying to hide a puppy from the landlord. You know, and then a couple years later, they're trying to hide a kitten from the landlord. This is actually blood. I did a couple of years ago.
Different actor playing the landlord, maybe.
Well, I don't remember if it was or not, but it's the same. Mm-hmm. It's the exact same thing. You know, that they even did on the show.
Yeah.
And it's like,
stealing from themselves.
Yeah, they're even rehashing themselves. I mean, Howard Hawks was notorious for that himself. You know, he did Rio Bravo, and then Rio Lobo. And another Rio one. And what happened was, he's working with one of the actors, and one of the actors says, this is the same movie you did a couple of years ago with Howard Hawks. You know, it's almost the exact same plot. And John Wayne said, well, if it was good once, it'll be good again. But what he's really saying was, hey, well, if I got paid before, I'll get paid again. You know, and even the actors don't care, you know?
Where have all the good writers gone? Is there some kind
They're
of...
dead.
They're dead. But what's the difference? Where are these people coming out of, I guess? Are they coming out of some schools of writing?
Well, this is... I want to say this about the writers. Okay, to be a great writer... I mean, Rod Serling was a good writer trying to be a great writer. His writing was ambitious, it was theme-oriented, it was story and character development-oriented, and he had important issues to talk about. But the skill level he had to execute these was not that of a great writer, it was that of a good writer. But in trying to do great works, he at least rose to a higher standard if he was trying to do mediocre works. And for that, I applaud you, Rod Serling.
Right.
But the thing is, to be a great writer, what it takes, one, you have to have an active imagination. You have to have an understanding of storytelling, and you have to have a broad base of experiences to draw from. And plus, you have to be very intelligent. It takes a lifetime of dedication to learn this craft. And writing is a craft. And it takes hard work. It takes the ability to research things well. It takes the patience to research a subject for years until you're ready to write the story. And I so rarely see that. You know, it's interesting because Dan O'Banion wrote a story, and the script got to Vin Diesel. And Dan had been researching this story for like 20 years before he sat down and finally wrote it. And he was talking with Vin about it, and he said, I want you to know that, you know, I put 20 years of research, you know, I put a lot of years of research into this before I even sat down and typed one word on the script.
I see.
And Vin said, yeah, I could see that as I was reading it. He said, and if I hadn't seen that, I wouldn't have read it to the end.
What was it?
It was Lord Shiva. It never got made. But what happened was, but he said it was the first time in 2 years he actually read a script all the way to the end of it. He said, when I read a screenplay, he said, if I read one thing that's wrong, one thing, I'm done.
Vin.
Yeah, he says, don't waste my time, you know? Bring it back to me when it's ready, you know? He said, I actually read it all the way from the beginning to the end. And he said, I went back right after I was done reading it and reread it. He said, because you do that to see if it can hold your interest a second time reading it.
It's a shame it didn't get made. That's probably why. Probably too good.
Well, but the thing was Vince said, you know, I saw the research while I was reading it. I saw that you'd done your homework. He said, if I hadn't seen that while I was reading it, he said, I wouldn't have bothered, you know?
Well, you've posed the question at some point, you know, do you have to be...
I want to finish what it takes to be a great writer just real quick.
Sure, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, great, you have to have great general knowledge skills. You have to have a well-developed vocabulary. You know, Edgar Allan Poe would read dictionaries on subjects like medicine and law. So you have a wide variety of words to draw from. You know, you also have to be a well-developed person. You have to be self-actualized. You look at a guy like William Goldman, very well-developed person.
I wouldn't say the same about Poe, though.
Well, Poe was a very intellectually self-actualized person, but he was a very damaged person. but he had a very fine intellect.
Sure.
But emotionally, he was a mess. He was a wreck. Yeah, I agree with you.
He had
an
unpleasant end, I suppose.
Yeah, his whole life was an unpleasant, a series of unpleasant ends.
Yeah.
Until he had a final big unpleasant end.
I think he ended up dead in a ditch.
Yeah, but you have to have an understanding of history. It's like what Plutarch said. He said, and this is one of the problems with our society, we become so dumbed down that we have no sense of history. And Plutarch said, a society that has no sense or understanding of history lives in a perpetual state of adolescence. And I see that, not just our culture, but in our writing and our media. The stuff that's being made, like Cannonball Run 2, or worse yet, the Transformer movies, which are just video games in the gaze of a movie.
Sure, or a kid's toy commercial.
Yeah, exactly. But you also have to be well-read in the classics and other subjects. You have to have a good understanding of human natures and all things in the world. And you also have to be daring and original. And you have to be like a rocket scientist, where you have to take all these elements and all these skills and combine them together in real time and make them work. It's hard. Plus, on top of having all these skills, you might only do it once as a writer. You might be a one-hit wonder.
One story in you.
Yeah, well, not just, you look at To Kill a Mockingbird, one-hit wonder. You look at Margaret Mitchell, Gone with the Wind, one-hit wonder. Did one, she was done. And it's tempting for a writer to stop after you've win the Pulitzer Prize. You haven't ever written anything bad. You could end with your reputation intact.
Rather than see yourself live to be derivative of yourself.
Instead of writing several mediocre and bad things, you get ripped apart.
Right.
It's very tempting. But for some of them, I think they just have one story in them. They tell it and they're done. But there are other writers that I'm going to keep swinging. It's like Kirk Douglas, the actor. Most actors, they start thinking about retiring 50s and 60s. Kirk is like, as long as I got a breath left in me, I'm going to keep auditioning. I'm going to keep acting. I'm going to keep being in the movies. I'm going to keep going.
Yes.
I love acting. Why should I stop because I'm older? I'm better as an actor now. And actors get better with age. That's a proven fact. Even bad actors get better with age.
Let's hope so.
But that's a general rule. It's like older actors like David Carradine in Kill Bill. He had so much experience to draw from when he was doing that part that it brought a depth to his character that we'd never seen before in his earlier works.
He was one of the better elements of that movie.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying was, when I saw him in earlier stuff, he was a good actor. But now it's like, wow, he's powerhouse in Kill Bill,
Yeah, he's got the gravitas of an older man.
Yeah, and I really felt that he had grown, not just as an actor, but as a person. He had so much to draw upon from his own life experiences. And that was coming through in his performance. And as I was watching it, it's like I was overwhelmed, I loved his performance in that.
That's
it was
true.
Phenomenal. But that's part of the problem. Okay, how are we doing on time?
We're kind of wrapping it up. We're in the home stretch here.
Okay. But I think, like I said, I think the real problem is that we have a society, an educational system that keeps lowering its standards. Instead of demanding excellence from our students, we just keep making it easier for them. The idea, we went from Cliff Notes to Spark Notes. From novels to Cliff Notes to Spark Notes. Cliff Notes are like 20, 30, 40, 50 pages. Spark Notes are like 2 pages describing describing a great classic novel.
We're rewarding and selecting for lack of intelligence and even incompetence nowadays.
It's like we're punishing success or we're rewarding failure. It's like we're suppressing our best and brightest. People like Dalton Trumbo was a blacklisted writer in the 50s, during the whole McCarthy disaster. And we see people rising to the top because of their skill at whoring themselves out, rather than actually having real job skills like in engineering or science, or even in writing.
Is there a way for movies and TV to find their way back to this sort of position?
I think we really need to change as a society as a whole. I think we need to get serious about education. and not treat teachers like they're basically
The lowest
rung
of society.
We treat you know, it's interesting because we treat teachers like they're one notch above janitors, or even on the same level as janitors. You know,
Some of them make less.
Yeah, some of them do make less, and it's too bad because these are the people that are preparing our next generation, and we're treating our kids as if they're a disposable commodity that we don't really care that much about. It's interesting to me because in Arab cultures, leaders like Yasser Arafat, or whatever Arab leader there are, the king of Saudi Arabia or whatnot, he will take time out of his day and teach kids as a school teacher. And this is common in the Arab culture, and I think we need to have our best and brightest do that. And the reason they do that because they're looking for the next generation of leaders, not just to teach their minds, but looking for someone. Okay, this guy could be one of the major leaders in our society. He shows promise. Let's give him some encouragement. Let's give him some help. I think we really need a transformation in our society to where we need to start valuing education, and in our society, we value materialism, we value celebrity, we value pleasure.
We've become very backward-looking when you think about all the remakes, especially in science fiction that we've been experiencing. What are the things we're thinking about?
But we need to go back to the values that made us great originally, which is hard work, discipline, patience, creativity, and integrity. These are values that sound almost laughable to us as a society. Integrity? What's that? I don't care about integrity. I just want a fast car and a good-looking girlfriend.
Integrity is a footnote in the base of the Wall Street crash.
Something I heard about once when I was in school. I think I fell asleep during that class.
So there may be hope for society and for Hollywood writers and for television, but...
Well, the thing is, you have to understand the cycles of things. It's like what George Powell said in The Time Machine. He said, we've had our dark ages before, we'll have them again. He's looking at things in a bigger picture cycle. I think we're entering a dark age. At least culturally and media-wise. I see shows that, as Al Huxley warned us in Brave New World, that are bombarding us with trivial and irrelevant information. And what worries me is also our leaders. Whether I'm talking about politicians or corporations or religious leaders, they're giving us answers. A lot of times they're the wrong answers. They're stupid answers, but they're answers. Whereas a great teacher like a Socrates, he's like, I give you the questions, and you have to come up with your own answers. I'm not going to spoon feed you what you should think.
The answer which is already somewhere within you.
Yeah, and if it's not within you, well then, I hope you marry someone who's really smart, who can do your thinking for you. Because that's probably going to be your best bet.
Well, we've almost out of time.
Yeah.
But let's bring it full circle to Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits. Two fantastic classic sci-fi series that are now available online portals. You could see most or all of these episodes actually online.
Well, I haven't been able to find fun and games on YouTube yet. Maybe there is a place.
But it is available through, there's another commercial portal which I won't mention on this show, but you can see it online for free.